Her name was Hypatia. So today, and she lived around 380 AD. So I'd like to take our history of ethics going from Greece, which we finished last time with Pythagoras, and we talked about the axial age, which had just came from primitive cultures. And we're very lucky. If you want to know what a primitive culture is, you get the chance to do it if you go to Hawaii. Because Hawaii had a primitive culture till about 1810, when Kamehameha took over the islands, and I go there a lot. There's a place called the Bishop's Museum in Hawaii that's just wonderful. It's great culture. And every day they operate, the school kids are there all the time. Obama, it's about 3 blocks from Obama's home, Puna House School, right there. But anyway, the Hawaiians around 1810, they had a huge culture, millions of people living in all the islands, and they picked up some English habits. Captain Cook, discovered the islands. He was killed there. And the habit they picked up was eating with each other, like princesses eating with princes, which is a no-no, is a taboo. And a taboo in a primitive culture means that you die if you violated it. For example, one of the kings of Oahu thought he did his subjects a favor because he would always go out in the day. He would never go out in the day. He would only go out at night, because if his shadow fell on you, you'd be clubbed to death, because his shadow was sacred. That's how your shadow was sacred in primitive cultures. So he'd only go out at night as a favor to his people. Well, when the princess, I can't remember her name, but when the princess ate with her brother, the prince, at the table in the English feast, the taboo structure crushed. It fell apart. And within 5 years, the society had collapsed. So from 1815 to the missionaries arrived, the Protestant missionaries arrived around 1830 or 40. You know the rest of the story from missionary after that. But until that time, it was chaos in the islands, total chaos. The culture had collapsed. So then the Protestant missionaries came in, and we know the story of how we built up the islands, manipulated them, exploited them, and then became a state. But there's been a good example of a primitive culture, if you want to see where the axial age was a unique thing that happened, as I mentioned last time, where China, India, Middle East, Sumeria, Egypt, Israel, they all developed religious sense independently and simultaneously, and we're still not sure why. But the Greeks had a unique one based on nationality. And we talked about Pythagoras last time. He should have been known for his musical scale, right? Everything's proportional. He used to hit pots, and pots had to have a certain rational number so you could make like a xylophone sound out of them. And he was killed in a religious war over Hippomus, who discovered irrationality, and you turned in the irrational number that he was killed over, called the perfect number, right? The perfect rectangle, the perfect square. So it had a radical 5 in it, and that meant it was irrational. We still carry that name today. Well, the Romans came in, and unique to the Romans, they picked up all the Greek gods. They picked them all up, and they carried their culture forward as if they just gave different names. But Zeus became Jupiter, and you know the rest. They had this pretty cool culture. We just keep it because this rationality helps us beat other people down. And the Romans, of course, were great conquerors, great builders. They built the first great domes. We still don't know how they built them. We'll talk about that later a little bit. But the Romans pretty much picked up on Greek philosophy. It didn't change it a whole lot because it was pretty advanced. And the Christians came in, of course. We know about Christianity, and Christianity latched onto the Greek philosophy. And out of the Greek philosophy came things like the Trinity and things that the Catholic Church didn't develop till the year 350 or so. We're all coming over a 300-year time span, came from the philosophy of the Greeks. So up to about the year 350, the Greek philosophy was still dominant, whether it was in Roman culture or through the Christian culture. Their philosophy was being embedded into the Christian religion, and we still hold it today. If, for example, you're Catholic, the Nicene Creed came from 320, around the 315 time frame, 325 time frame, when they took Greek philosophy and they put it into a creed that still said that passes today, right, with a couple of minor changes. So it just shows you the impact that that philosophy has had. And to the extent that ethics comes from those moral pronouncements, that ethics and morality are related in such a way that the religious precepts have power, like they did in the primitive cultures, and those things are still with us today. Well, Hypatia was a female in Alexandria around the year 370, and she would have been a modern woman today put into that time, which is really amazing, because most of us live in the cultural bubble we grew up in. We grew up in a cultural bubble that gives you kind of the illusion of self-esteem and that you're important. You know, that's how the culture is set up to do. That's why you're here. You're here to learn, get grades, and get a good job. Well, her cultural bubble was totally different than that time for a female. But somehow she managed to go to all the schools and to educate herself, in a sense the way Lincoln did. And she was brilliant. And Hypatia started teaching in the Alexandria schools. Well, that was good, except that she conflicted with a religious leader called Cyril. And Cyril is a saint in the Catholic Church still today. But he accused her of being undogmatic and teaching reason. You know, she was an astronomer, she was a mathematician, she was way out of her social place where she should have been. So, to make a long story short, they basically made the monks at the time were the religious police, and the religious police basically started a riot. They caught her off her chariot coming home from the Roman Emperor's house, and killed her. They killed her, took her to the temple, cut her in little pieces with shards from pots, and then they burned her remains in the center of the temple. This is 380 or so, 380, 385. So that's kind of the first conflict we see, the real conflict that's coming up between dogmatic. Now don't forget, there was no official church at the time. You had an Alexandria patriarch, a Jerusalem patriarch, a Constantinople patriarch, and a place in Syria, not Damascus. Yeah, I think it was four main patriarchs. There was no Catholic church at the time. So the patriarch in Alexandria, which is close to where St. Augustine was, and very close to about the same time frame that is, maybe 60 years earlier or so, it was its own little independent entity, which basically destroyed her. But it gives us the first battle, and isn't it interesting that the first battle between reason, as defined by the ancient Greeks, and modern dogma, which was developing around 350, 360, occurred with a female at the center, right? At the center. So that takes us to what we call the Dark Ages, and I'm going to kind of quit there. But those of you who haven't heard of Hypatia, just Google her. If you get some time over the summer, watch the movie Agora. It's a little overdone, but it's good. It's good, and it shows you her relationship with the secular authorities at the time and the religious authorities at the time, and how the monks who were the religious police, which we still have in some countries today, you have them. And that battle started pretty much right there in Alexandria. And it's a great read. It's a great story. That leads us to what's called the Dark Ages for us. And again, us, I'm talking about the Western world, Italy, France, Germany, the Dark Ages. But in the East, remember, Constantine built Constantinople around 300 or so. And the Byzantine Empire never had Dark Ages. So the Byzantines, and we'll talk about them next time, they developed their own religious culture, their own Eastern culture. And of course, they were joined with the Western culture until the West fell. And the only thing that was left in the West, when the West finally fell, as you probably learned in school, was the church. The church remained. Dioceses, parishes, all those terms come from Roman terms that we still have today. But the whole social structure collapsed in the West. Never collapsed in the East. The East kept Byzantium, and its ethics were, in fact, in the East, Caesar, that they named Caesar, or Constantine, went through today until the 20th century. Tsar. The Tsar that was overthrown by Lenin. Tsar means Caesar. So that Eastern Empire stayed in Constantinople until it fell in 1453 to the Turks. And then that religious culture went north to Moscow and Kiev, and it existed until the communists took over. So we're talking about things, long time concept, but If you didn't learn enough history, none of us did. I picked up most of this on my own in the last 20 years or so. The history is fantastic. And there really was not a dark ages in the East. The ethical culture stayed intact in the East, and it's still with us today, in the East, even the Byzantine fell. So that takes us to about